Welcome, kindred spirits, to a place of positivity, passion, and purpose. Welcome aboard as we set sail on a journey through 1976 Michigan Wolverines football team. The 1976 Michigan Wolverines football team represented the University of Michigan in the 1976 Big Ten Conference football season. In their 8th year under head coach Bo Schembechler, the Wolverines finished the season with a record, won the Big Ten Conference Championship, and played in the 1977 Rose Bowl. The Wolverines outscored their opponents 432-95 and ranked first in the country in total offense 448.1 yards per game, scoring offense 38.7 points per game, and scoring defense 7.2 points per game. In the final AP and UPI polls, Michigan was ranked. Highlights of the season included a victory over Stanford in which 3 Michigan running backs rushed for over 100 yards. Michigan's victory over Navy was the worst defeat in the history of the Naval Academy's football program. Michigan spent most of the season ranked in the polls, but a loss to Purdue in the 9th game of the season dropped the Wolverines out of the top spot. In the final game of the regular season, Michigan defeated Ohio State to win the Big Ten Championship. The game marked the first time the Buckeyes had been held scoreless since 1964. In the 1977 Rose Bowl, Michigan lost to USC, as the Wolverines completed only 4 passes and were held to 155 rushing yards. On offense, senior running back Rob Lytle was selected as the team's most valuable player, finished 3rd in voting for the Heisman Trophy, and led the Wolverines with 1,469 rushing yards and 16 touchdowns. Lytle finished the season as Michigan's all-time career rushing leader with 3,307 rushing yards gained from 1974 to 1976. Quarterback Rick Leach passed for 973 yards and 13 touchdowns and rushed for another 638 yards and 10 touchdowns. His 13 touchdown passes tied a team record set by Bob Schembechler in 1947. Harlan Huckleby added 912 rushing yards, and wingback Jim Smith caught 26 passes for 714 yards and 6 touchdowns. Lytle, Smith, offensive right guard Mark Donahue, and offensive right tackle Bill Dufik were selected as first-team All-Americans. On defense, Calvin O'Neill started all 12 games at middle linebacker, led the team with 139 tackles, and was a consensus first-team All-American. 9 Michigan players were selected as first-team All-Big Ten Conference players. 21 players from the 1976 team went on to play in the National Football League, and another Rick Leach was drafted by the Denver Broncos in the 1979 NFL Draft, but opted instead to play Major League Baseball. Let's now enter the realm of Week 1, Wisconsin, and discover the fascinating stories it has to tell. Michigan opened the season on September 11, 1976, with a victory over Wisconsin. Michigan scored 2 points on a safety on the second play from scrimmage as Wisconsin running back Mike Morgan fumbled the handoff on a reverse play and the ball rolled out of the end zone. Harlan Huckleby then extended the lead to 9-0 with a 56-yard touchdown run on Michigan's third play from scrimmage. Michigan led the game at the end of the first quarter and held on for a win. Michigan's offense was led by tailback Harlan Huckleby, who rushed for 131 yards and 3 touchdowns on 19 carries. Rick Leach completed 6 of 8 passes for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. Leach also rushed for 84 yards on 9 carries. Wingback Jim Smith scored 2 touchdowns and netted 174 yards in the game, including gains on kickoff and punt returns, receptions, and reverse plays. Team captain Rob Lytle gained 76 yards on 16 attempts, but also fumbled 3 times. Mike Ken and Jerry Shaw were credited with leading an offensive line that completely controlled the line of scrimmage. Defensively, the game was a disappointment for Michigan. Wisconsin's 27 points was the most allowed by a Michigan team since 1969, and Wisconsin's 426 yards of offense was the most allowed by Michigan since before Bo Schembechler took over as head coach. After the game, Schembechler told the press, 27 points, that's what we usually give up in the first half of the season. I wasn't happy with the movement, I wasn't happy with the pursuit, I wasn't happy with the tackling, I wasn't happy with the playing of the ball in the secondary, and I wasn't happy with the heat we put on the passer. In the AP poll released after the game, Michigan was ranked with Ohio State at. Michigan's move was aided by upsets of Alabama and Texas and a tie between Nebraska and LSU. Now, let's delve into the intricacies of Week 2, Stanford, and explore its various aspects. On September 18, 1976, Michigan played Stanford at Michigan Stadium. Michigan and Stanford had played to a tie in 1975, and the Associated Press picked the rematch as its upset special of the week, predicting a Stanford win by a score. Instead, Michigan defeated Stanford by a score of 3. Michigan running backs rushed for at least 100 yards in the game. Harlan Huckleby led the group with 160 yards and a touchdown on 15 carries. Russell Davis added 115 yards and 2 touchdowns on 7 carries, including an 85-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter. Rob Lytle had 101 yards and 2 touchdowns on 19 carries. Rick Leach completed only 2 of 8 passes for 15 yards, but added 70 rushing yards and a touchdown on 7 carries. One of Leach's completions went 3 yards to tight end Gene Johnson for a touchdown in the third quarter. In total, the Wolverines gained 531 rushing yards against the Cardinal. On defense, Michigan intercepted 3 Stanford passes. Calvin O'Neill led the team with 11 total tackles. Place kicker Bob Wood converted on 6 of 7 extra point attempts and kicked a 49-yard field goal in the second quarter. The game marked the first time a Stanford team had been shut out since 1967. On the Wednesday before the Stanford game, the ranked Michigan team received a visit from President Gerald Ford. Ford, who was the most valuable player of the 1934 Michigan Wolverines football team, spent time with team during a practice session and later ate with the team. Ford noted, "They're an awful lot bigger today. Not only are they bigger, but they're better." Split and Kurt Stevenson later recalled the dinner. A tray appeared with a big New York steak in front of the president. What happened next is kind of a blur. President Ford started to choke and the Secret Service started to circle the table. I don't know why, but in one immediate action, I reached back and gave him a good whack on the back. A hunk of beef flew out and across the table. The president turned to me and said, "Thanks." From that point on, there were about 6 agents who were giving me eagle eyes. Later that day, Ford formally opened his re-election campaign with a speech to a boisterous crowd of 14,000 at Chrysler Arena. Moving ahead, let's uncover the hidden gems within Week 3, Navy, and discover their significance. On September 25, 1976, Michigan faced Navy at Michigan Stadium. 2 days before the game, the school's most famous alumni Gerald Ford of Michigan and Jimmy Carter of the Naval Academy faced off in a presidential debate. The Associated Press reported that a survey of registered voters gave Ford a slight edge over Carter in the debate, but noted that things were not expected to be that close when the 2 schools met on the football field. In fact, Michigan defeated Navy by a 70-14 score. The game marked the worst defeat in the history of the Naval Academy's football program. The point total was also the highest by a Michigan team since an 85-0 win over the University of Chicago in 1939. Navy took an early lead on a touchdown by quarterback John Krofsky and led 14-12 halfway through the second quarter. Michigan tied the score with its second safety of the second quarter and outscored in the second half to put the game out of reach. Quarterback Rick Leach completed 8 of 12 passes for 179 yards and led the scoring with 2 rushing touchdowns and 2 passing touchdowns. A total of 9 players scored for the Wolverines. On offense, touchdowns were scored by Leach, Rob Lytle, Lawrence Reed, Kevin King, Stacey Johnson, Jim Smith, and Gene Johnson. Middle linebacker Kelvin O'Neill also scored a touchdown on a 29-yard return after intercepting a Navy pass. Place kicker Bob Wood tied a Michigan record with a 41-yard field goal, his third of the season, and converted all 9 extra-point kicks. Jim Smith caught 4 passes for 147 yards and added another 55 yards on kickoff and punt returns. Harlan Huckleby rushed for 79 yards on 11 carries but did not score and left the game early after sustaining a shoulder injury. After the game, Bo Schembechler denied running up the score, having used 53 players in the game. Schembechler told the press that his squad was not a great team and that he would prefer not to be ranked. In the following section, we'll be immersing ourselves in the captivating world of Week 4, Wake Forest. On October 2, 1976, Michigan faced the Wake Forest Demon Deacons in the team's 4th consecutive home game at Michigan Stadium. In the week before the game, Wake Forest head coach Chuck Mills noted that he had heard that Bear Bryant endorsed Gerald Ford and joked, "I'm withholding my endorsement until after the Michigan game to see what kind of hosts they are." The Wolverines shut out the Demon Deacons by a score of. Rob Lytle rushed for 110 yards and 2 touchdowns on 14 carries and also caught 2 passes for 21 yards. With the total, Lytle moved past Tom Harmon for 4th place on Michigan's all-time career rushing list. Harlan Huckleby added 89 yards, and quarterback Rick Leach completed only 3 of 14 passes and threw 3 interceptions. Commenting on Leach's passing, one sportswriter noted, "The Wolverines are rolling up a shutout, and 340 yards rushing. Hardly anybody notices the passing. Maybe that's a good thing." Was wild high and wild low, but in games like these it really doesn't matter. Bo Schembechler told the press after the game, "You people like passing and there it is. That's how we keep the score down." In this part of the video, we'll be delving deeper into Week 5, Michigan State, and analyzing its key components. On October 9, 1976, Michigan played its cross-state rival Michigan State in the annual battle for the Paul Bunyan Trophy. The Wolverines had won 6 straight games, with the last victory for the Spartans dating back to 1969. Michigan extended the streak to 7 games with a victory at Michigan Stadium. Michigan's 42 points was the most it had scored against Michigan State since 1947. Fullback Rob Lytle rushed for 180 yards on 10 carries, including a 45-yard gain on a fake punt and a 75-yard touchdown run in the first quarter. After the game, Bo Schembechler said of Lytle, "If that guy isn't an All-American, I don't know who is." Lytle added, "All backs like to break away on a long one like that. It was the longest run I've had at Michigan. In fact, I think this was my biggest day ever." Harlan Huckleby rushed for 126 yards and 3 touchdowns on 23 carries. Russell Davis added 91 yards on 13 carries. In all, the Wolverines rushed for 442 yards on 62 carries against the Spartans. Quarterback Rick Leach completed 5 of 7 passes for 93 yards and rushed for 36 yards on 11 carries. Wolfman Jerry Zuver scored Michigan's final touchdown on a 60-yard interception return in the 4th quarter. In the AP poll released on the Monday after the game, Michigan retained its ranking with 57 out of 60 first-place votes and 1,194 points out of a possible 1,200 points. Pittsburgh was ranked with the remaining 3 first-place votes. In this segment, we'll be unraveling the complexities of Week 6 at Northwestern and exploring its multifaceted nature. On October 16, 1976, Michigan faced Northwestern for its first game on the road. Playing at Deitch Stadium, the Wolverines scored 28 points in the second quarter, compiled 346 yards of total offense in the first half, and led 31-0 at halftime. Michigan applied the brakes in the second half, and both teams scored single touchdowns in the 4th quarter. Michigan won by a final score of. Rob Lytle, who moved from fullback to tailback in the game, rushed for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns on 18 carries. With his performance against Northwestern, Lytle moved past Ron Johnson and into third place on Michigan's all-time rushing yardage list. Harlan Huckleby gained 80 yards and scored a touchdown on 17 carries, while Russell Davis rushed for 58 yards on 13 carries. Rick Leach completed only 3 of 7 passes and threw 2 interceptions. One of Leach's passes went 57 yards for a touchdown to Jim Smith. Bob Wood kicked a field goal in the first quarter and converted on all 4 extra point attempts. Michigan remained ranked in both polls after its victory over Northwestern. It captured 40 out of 42 first-place votes from the UPI Board of Coaches. As we embark on the next leg of our journey, let's unpack the layers of Week 7 at Indiana and examine its core elements. For its 7th game of the year, Michigan defeated Indiana by a 35-0 score in cold, wet conditions at Bloomington. Rick Leach completed all 4 of his passes for 102 yards, including a 9-yard touchdown pass to Gene Johnson in the second quarter and a 15-yard touchdown pass to Russell Davis in the third period. Rob Lytle rushed for 175 yards on 25 carries and scored touchdowns on runs of 14 yards and 1 yard. Russell Davis also rushed for 69 yards and a touchdown, while Harlan Huckleby rushed for 67 yards, including a 1-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter. While Michigan defeated Indiana, Tony Dorsett of Pitt rushed for 180 yards in Pitt's 45-0 victory over Navy, breaking the all-time NCAA rushing record previously held by Archie Griffin. As we venture forward, let's examine Week 8, Minnesota in detail and gain a deeper appreciation for its significance. On October 30, 1976, Michigan defeated Minnesota 45-0 in the annual Battle for the Little Brown Jug. The game was played in steady rain and cold conditions before a homecoming crowd of 104,426, at that time the 5th largest crowd to watch a game at Michigan Stadium. Quarterback Rick Leach accounted for 4 touchdowns, 2 rushing and 2 passing. He rushed for a career-high 114 yards on 10 carries, including a 28-yard touchdown run in the second quarter and a 6-yard touchdown run in the third quarter. Leach also completed all 4 of his passes for 40 passing yards, including a 13-yard touchdown pass to Rob Lytle in the second quarter and a 22-yard touchdown pass to Jim Smith in the third quarter. Lytle alternated at the tailback and fullback positions and rushed for 129 rushing yards, 107 in the first half, including a 2-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter. Harlan Huckleby gained 55 yards on 12 carries, including a 6-yard touchdown run on an option pitch from Leach in the first quarter. In the Toledo Blade, John Hannon wrote after the game that Leach handles the option with the light fingers of a pickpocket and opined that Michigan's combination of Lytle, Huckleby, Smith and Davis may be the fastest backfield in collegiate history. Place kicker Bob Wood also kicked a 46-yard field goal in the third quarter and converted on all 6 extra-point kicks. Defensively, Michigan held Minnesota to 80 rushing yards. Minnesota quarterback Tony Dungy completed 12 of 20 passes for 85 yards, but Dwight Hicks intercepted a Dungy pass in the fourth quarter and returned it 51 yards. Freshman Ron Simpkins intercepted another Dungy pass with a minute left in the game. After the game, Bo Schembechler told the press, "If we can keep improving, we will be very difficult to beat. We are playing with more confidence now and our defense is getting better. It seems to be improving every week." Schembechler also praised Lytle. "There is no back in the United States of America who does more for his team than Rob Lytle does for Michigan." With a convincing victory over Minnesota, Michigan solidified its ranking. The Wolverines received 40 of 41 first-place votes from the UPI Board of Coaches. Now, let's shift our perspective and explore Week 9 at Purdue through a fresh lens, unlocking new perspectives. Michigan traveled to West Lafayette, Indiana, to play Purdue on November 6, 1976. Michigan was heavily favored and had not lost a game to Purdue since 1966. The Boilermakers came into the game with a record, but proceeded to stun the college football world with a 16-14 upset victory over the Wolverines. It was the first time Michigan had lost to a Big Ten Conference team other than Ohio State since its loss to Michigan State in 1969. Michigan took a lead in the first quarter on an 8-yard touchdown run by Rick Leach. Leach's score was set up by linebacker Jerry Vogel's recovery of a fumble at the Michigan 42-yard line. Purdue's Scott Deiking responded with 2 touchdown runs, one each in the first and second quarters. Purdue held a lead at halftime. Early in the third quarter, Michigan drove to Purdue's 1-yard line, but Leach fumbled and the ball was turned over to Purdue. Later in the third quarter, Leach threw a 64-yard touchdown pass to Jim Smith, and Bob Wood kicked the extra point to give Michigan a lead. On the next drive, Jerry Zuver intercepted a pass to stop a Purdue drive at Michigan's 22-yard line. However, Rob Lytle fumbled on the next drive, and Purdue recovered the ball at its own 29-yard line. Purdue drove to the Michigan 6-yard line. While Michigan's defense held, Rock Supin kicked a field goal on 4th down with 4 minutes remaining in the game. With 9 seconds left in the game, Bob Wood's attempt at a 37-yard field goal went wide to the left. Rob Lytle rushed for 153 yards in the game to pass Gordon Bell at the number 2 position on Michigan's career rushing yardage list. Purdue rushed for 251 yards in the game, including 162 yards by Deiking. After the game, Bo Schembechler told reporters, "It hurts a lot. We don't accept it. We shouldn't accept it, because we should have won. No defeat is good. We got down there at the end and we should have scored. But when you depend on winning on a forward pass or a field goal, you're in trouble." In a post-game account, the UPI dubbed Purdue the Spoilermakers, noting that Purdue had upset a ranked Notre Dame team in 1974 before upsetting ranked Michigan. 4 days before the Wolverines lost to Purdue, the team's most famous alumnus lost the 1976 presidential election to Jimmy Carter. After losing a close election, Ford harkened back to his days as a football player. "We lost in the last quarter." In the following segment, we'll be examining Week 10, Illinois in greater detail. After the loss to Purdue, Michigan returned to Ann Arbor and played Illinois on November 13, 1976. Prior to the game, Associated Press writer Fred Rothenberg noted that Illinois was in the unenviable position of playing Michigan on the heels of the Purdue game. Rothenberg wrote, "The University of Michigan and its most famous alumnus both lost their No. 1 positions last week. President Ford immediately went on vacation. The Wolverines went back to work. Pity poor Illinois." Michigan defeated the Illini by a score of. Rob Lytle rushed for 89 yards on 21 carries and scored 3 touchdowns, a 5-yard touchdown reception in the second quarter and a pair of touchdown runs in the third quarter. With his rushing yards against Illinois, Lytle became Michigan's all-time career rushing leader. Lytle totaled 3,085 career rushing yards after the Illinois game, surpassing Billy Taylor's school record by 13 yards. Rick Leach rushed for 65 yards and completed 9 of 15 passes for 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. With Illinois putting 7 or 8 men on the line at times, no Michigan player was able to rush for 100 yards in the game. Accordingly, Michigan opened up the passing attack. Bo Schembechler said after the game, "When they put that many people on the line of scrimmage, you have to throw the ball over their heads." In addition to the touchdown pass to Lytle, Leach connected with tight end Mark Schmidge in the second quarter for a 7-yard touchdown pass. Jim Smith also caught 6 passes for 127 yards. Leach's 2 touchdown passes gave him 13 for the season, tying the Michigan record set in 1947 by Bob Schembechler. After the game, Illinois coach Bob Blackman said, "Leach is not just a good quarterback, he is a great quarterback." We knew he could run the option, but he can also pass the ball. On defense, Michigan held Illinois to 101 rushing yards and 79 passing yards. Calvin O'Neill also intercepted a Kurt Steger pass late in the second quarter to set up Michigan's third touchdown of the half. Dom Tedesco also intercepted a Steger pass to set up Michigan's fifth touchdown in the third quarter. Tackle Greg Morton led the team with 15 tackles in the game. Michigan concluded its home schedule with an average of 103,159 spectators per game, setting a new record for college football attendance. The prior record had been set by Michigan in 1975 with an average attendance of 98,449. Now, let's shift our perspective and explore Week 11 at Ohio State through a fresh lens, unlocking new perspectives. In the final game of the regular season, Michigan ranked traveled to Columbus, Ohio, for its annual rivalry game with Ohio State ranked. Each team entered the game with one loss on its record, but Ohio State was undefeated in conference play. For the 8th time in 9 years, the winner of the game would become the Big Ten Conference champion and earn the conference's berth in the Rose Bowl. The Wolverines had not beaten the Buckeyes since 1971, and Bo Schembechler had not won a game in Ohio Stadium. Stories ran about Schembechler being jinxed or hexed at Ohio Stadium, but Schembechler rejected the notion. "I don't look at it as a jinx." On learning that his team was favored by 5 points, Schembechler said, "Being the favorite doesn't put any points on the board." Michigan defeated Ohio State by a 20-0 score. The game drew a record crowd of 88,250 to Ohio Stadium and was broadcast to a national television audience. The game was the worst home loss for Ohio State since 1967, and it snapped Ohio State's streak of 122 games without being shut out. The last time an Ohio State team had been shut out was Michigan's 10-0 victory in 1964. After a scoreless first half, Russell Davis scored 2 touchdowns for Michigan in the third quarter. Davis tallied 83 yards on 24 carries. After Davis's second touchdown, holder Jerry Zuva ran for a 2-point conversion. Rob Lytle rushed for 165 yards on 29 carries, including a touchdown in the fourth quarter. Rick Leach completed none of his 6 passes and threw an interception. Bob Wood converted on both of his extra-point kicks. On defense, the Wolverines became the first team to hold the Buckeyes scoreless since 1964. They held Ohio State to 173 yards of total offense, including 101 rushing yards and only 5 pass receptions. Defensive tackle Greg Morton led the team with 14 tackles, and Jim Pickens and Jerry Zuva each had an interception. Late in the second quarter, with the game still scoreless, Ohio State drove the ball to the Michigan 10-yard line when Pickens intercepted a pass in the end zone. After the game, Woody Hayes cited Pickens' interception as a turning point. The interception at the end of the first half was a costly error on our part. It was my call all the way, and it was just a bad call. If we had scored then, it might have affected the second half outcome. Michigan ended the season ranked first in the country in total offense 448.1 yards per game, scoring offense 38.7 points per game, and scoring defense 7.2 points per game. Now, let's shift our focus to Rose Bowl and embark on an intellectual exploration of its various dimensions. With its victory over Ohio State, Michigan advanced to play the USC Trojans in the 1977 Rose Bowl on New Year's Day. Michigan came into the game ranked in the AP poll and in the UPI coaches poll. USC was ranked by the AP and by the UPI. Michigan lost to the Trojans, 14-6. In the first quarter, neither team scored, and as Heisman Trophy runner-up Ricky Bell was injured and unable to return to the game. Michigan took a lead on a 1-yard touchdown run by Rob Lytle in the second quarter, but Bob Wood's extra-point kick was blocked. The Trojans moved downfield on the next drive, and quarterback Vince Evans put USC in the lead on a 1-yard touchdown run with a minute and a half left in the first half. Neither team scored in the third quarter, and freshman tailback Charles White scored USC's second touchdown with 3 minutes left in the game. White rushed for 122 yards in the game. Michigan's offense was held to 155 rushing yards and 76 passing yards. Rob Lytle gained 67 yards on 18 carries, and Russell Davis was limited to 39 yards on 10 carries. Rick Leach completed only 4 of 12 passes and was held to 34 rushing yards on 13 carries. Press coverage of the game focused on Michigan's conservative, run-oriented offense and USC's more versatile attack. Los Angeles Times columnist Jim Murray wrote, "Of course, it's possible Michigan doesn't know how to catch a pass. They never throw any, so may not know it's legal. The way they play the game, you could hold it in a cave." An Associated Press story noted, "It was the same old story. The Big Ten's Rose Bowl representative, a stick-to-the-ground team, just couldn't cope with the versatility of its Pacific 8 Conference opponent." Another writer noted that the Rose Bowl had become an annual wake for the Big Ten. It is rapidly becoming an annual event. Only the corpses are different. As we venture forward, let's examine postseason in detail and gain a deeper appreciation for its significance. Several Michigan players, led by Rob Lytle, received postseason honors and awards. Lytle, called the greatest back I ever coached by Bo Schembechler, was selected as a first-team All-American by both the AP, UPI, Walter Camp Foundation, American Football Coaches Association AFCA, Football News, and College Football News. In balloting for the Heisman Trophy, Lytle finished third with 35 first-place votes and 413 points, trailing Tony Dorsett's 701 first-place votes, 2,357 points, and Ricky Bell's 73 first-place votes, 1,346 points. Lytle also won the 1976 Weisman Trophy, presented each year to persons selected as the nation's best football player. Other Michigan players selected as All-Americans were Calvin O'Neill, UPI First Team, Walter Camp Foundation First Team, Sporting News First Team, College Football News First Team, AP Second Team, Jim Smith AP First Team, FWAA First Team, Sporting News First Team, Football News First Team, UPI Second Team, Mark Donahue UPI First Team, NEA First Team, FWAA First Team, Football News First Team, Walter Camp Foundation First Team, and Bill Dufik College Football News First Team. 9 Michigan players were selected for first-team All-Big Ten Conference honors. The Associated Press selected 6 offensive players: Jim Smith, Bill Dufik, Mark Donahue, Walt Downing, Rick Leach, and Rob Lytle, and 2 defensive players: Greg Morton, Calvin O'Neill. The UPI selected the same 8 players plus defensive end John Anderson. In the upcoming section, we'll be dissecting offense and exploring its implications in greater detail. A. Philip Andrews, FB, Jr., Brooklyn, New York. Greg Bartnick, OG, Jr., Detroit. John Sedier, QB, Jr., Cincinnati. Ralph Clayton, WB, Detroit. Russell Davis, FB, So. Woodbridge, Virginia. Started 3 games at fullback. Mark Donahue, OG, Jr., Oak Lawn, Illinois. Started 7 games at right guard, 5 games at left guard. Walt Downing, C. Jr., Coatesville, Pennsylvania. Started all 12 games at center. Bill Dufik, T. Jr., East Grand Rapids, Michigan. Started all 12 games at right tackle. Jim Hackett, C. Sr. London, Ohio. Mike Harden, S.E. Detroit. Harlan Huckleby, TB, So. Detroit. Started 9 games at tailback. Gene Johnson, TE, So. Flint, Michigan. Started all 12 games at tight end. Stacy Johnson, QB, So. Camden, New Jersey. Mike Ken, OT, Jr., Evanston, Illinois. Started all 12 games at left tackle. Kevin King, FB, Jr., Oak Lawn, Illinois. Rick Leach, QB, So. Flint, Michigan started all 12 games at quarterback Kirk Lewis, OG, Sr. Garden City, Michigan started one game at right guard Rob Lytle, Sr. Fremont, Ohio started 9 games at fullback, 3 games at tailback Doug Marsh, T.E. Akron, Ohio Steve Nwuta, C. Jr. Norristown, Pennsylvania Max Richardson, W.B. Jr. Fort Wayne, Indiana Mark Schmidge, T.E. So. Cincinnati Jim Smith, W.B. Sr. Blue Island, Illinois started all 12 games at wingback Kurt Stevenson, S.E. Jr. La Jolla, California started all 12 games at split end Jerry Shara, O.G. Jr. Oak Lawn, Illinois started 7 games at left guard, 4 games at right guard Richard A. White, S.E. Jr. Cincinnati, Ohio Bob Wood, P.K. Sr. London, Ohio. As we transition, let's shed light on defense and its relevance to our ongoing exploration. John Anderson, D. Jr. Waukesha, W.I. started 10 games at defensive end. Steve Anderson, M.G. Jr. Toledo, Ohio. Jim Bolden, D.B. Sr. Akron, Ohio started 12 games at weak side cornerback Mark DeSantis, D.E. So. Harper Woods, Michigan. John Gieseler, D.T. So. Woodville, Ohio. Chris Godfrey, D.T. Detroit. Steve Graves, M.G. So. Cleveland started 3 games at middle guard Curtis Greer, D.T. So. Detroit. John Hennessy, D.T. Sr. Chicago started 12 games at defensive tackle Dwight Hicks, S. Jr. Pennsauken, New Jersey started 7 games at safety Derek Howard, Wolf, Jr. Hamilton, Ohio started 5 games at strong side cornerback, 1 game at Wolf when William Jackson, D.T. So. Richmond, Virginia. Mike Jolly, D.B. Melvindale, Michigan. Bob Lang, M.G. Sr. Chicago started 9 games at middle guard Rex Mackle, L.B. Jr. Berea, Ohio started 1 game at defensive end Jerry Meter, L.B. So. Birmingham, Michigan started 4 games at middle linebacker Greg Morton, D.T. Sr. Akron, Ohio started 12 games at defensive tackle Calvin O'Neill, L.B. Sr. Saginaw, Michigan started 12 games at middle linebacker Mel Owens, L.B. DeKalb, Illinois. Robert Potek, Wolf, So. Farmington Hills, Michigan. Jim Pickens, D.B. Jr. Sylvania, Ohio started 7 games at strong side cornerback, 5 games at safety Tom Sebrin, D.E. So. Detroit started 2 games at defensive end Ron Simpkins, L.B. Detroit. Roger Shafransky, M.G. Sr. Bay City, Michigan. Dominic Tedesco, D.E. Jr. Riverside, Illinois started 11 games at defensive end Jerry Vogel, L.B. Sr. Cincinnati started 8 games at middle linebacker Jerry Zuver, Wolf, Sr. Archbold, Ohio started 11 games at Wolfman. In this chapter, we'll be shedding light on awards and its role in shaping our understanding. All-Americans, Rob Lytle, Calvin O'Neill, Jim Smith, Mark Donahue. All-Conference, Jim Smith, Greg Morton, Calvin O'Neill, Bill Dufik, Mark Donahue, Walt Downing, Rick Leach, Rob Lytle, John Anderson. Most Valuable Player, Rob Lytle. Meyer Morton Award, Greg Morton. John Morbeach Award, Rick Leach. Frederick Matthew Award, John Anderson. Arthur Robinson Scholarship Award, Kirk Lewis. In this chapter, we'll be unraveling the enigma of NFL and discovering its transformative power. 21 of the players from the 1976 Michigan team went on to play in the National Football League. They are John Anderson, Green Bay Packers; Ralph Clayton, St. Louis Cardinals, 1981; Russell Davis, Pittsburgh Steelers; Walt Downing, San Francisco Ayers; John Dieseler, Miami Dolphins; Chris Godfrey, New York Jets, 1980; New York Giants; Seattle Seahawks, 1988; Curtis Greer, St. Louis Cardinals; Mike Harden, Denver Broncos; Los Angeles Raiders; John Hennessy, New York Jets; Dwight Hicks, San Francisco Ayers; Indianapolis Colts, 1986; Harlan Huckleby, Green Bay Packers; Mike Jolly, Green Bay Packers; Mike Ginn, Atlanta Falcons; Rob Lytle, Denver Broncos; Doug Marsh, St. Louis Cardinals; Greg Morton, Buffalo Bills, 1977; Calvin Daniel, Baltimore Colts, 1978; Mel Owens, Los Angeles Rams; Tom Sebren, San Francisco Ayers; St. Louis Cardinals, 1980; and Ron Simpkins, Cincinnati Bengals; Green Bay Packers, 1988; and Jim Smith, Pittsburgh Steelers; Los Angeles Raiders, 1985. A 22nd player, Rick Leach, was drafted by the Denver Broncos, but opted instead to play Major League Baseball for the Detroit Tigers. Leach went on to play for 10 years in the major leagues. Another, Mark Donahue, spent 2 seasons with the Cincinnati Bengals, but did not appear in a regular season game. Our focus now turns to coaching staff, an important aspect of our discussion. Head coach, Bo Schembechler; assistant coaches, Dennis Brown, varsity reserve coach; Tyrell Burton, offensive ends coach; Jerry Hanlon, offensive line; Jack Harbaugh, defensive backs; Bill McCartney, defensive line; Gary Moeller, defensive coordinator; Tom Reed, defensive assistant; Paul Schiddel, offensive interior line; Chuck Stobart, offensive backs coach trainer; Lindsey McLean, manager; Robert I. Brown. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.